Okay, in this video I'm going to do a recitation of what is one of the most famous collections of Japanese waka classical poetry, the Ogura Hyakunin Isshu, which is sometimes translated as the Ogura sequence of 100 poems by 100 poets. And since this is a fairly long work, 100 waka total, I'm going to just recite the work here. And I'm going to recite the original Japanese as well as Carter's brilliant translation, and I'll have a link to his book that includes the translation. You can purchase that on your own, and I'll also include the Japanese original text for the poems in the description or in the study guide. Okay, and the study guide, I will put the link to that in the description as well, and then I will make a second video that explains the terms and so forth that are on the study guide, the information about the compiler of the collection, namely Fujiwara Teika, information about Japanese waka poetry in general, and some review that we've already done in the other videos and the other worksheets and readings, review of terms such as ushin and so forth, and some of the background information about the late Heian period and early Kamakura period. Okay, so this work, Fujiwara Teika died, I think, in the 1240s, if I'm not mistaken. This work was compiled in the mid-1230s, probably. So they're not sure exactly when it was compiled, but it was somewhere probably in the 1230s, and it includes 100 poems by 100 poets dating back from several hundred years. Okay, so I'll read the entire work along with the topic that the poem falls under, right? Each, as we discussed before, each waka usually has a dai that goes along with it, whether it's a seasonal dai or love. I think in this collection there are over 40 of the 100 poems are classified under the koi, or love topic, right? So there's a preponderance of love poems in this work. And okay, that's enough, and we will discuss further information in the second video. For now, I will read this entire work. Okay, beginning with poem 1, Autumn, by Emperor Tenji, who reigned from 688 to 71. Right, so this is almost 500 years before the compilation of this collection. Right, so it's dating way back into Japanese history, into the Nara period, the pre-Heian period. I'll read the Japanese original first, and then followed by Carter's translations. Aki no ta no kari hono iyo no to ma o ara mi, waga koromo de wa tsuyu ni nure tsutsu. Out in autumn field stands my makeshift hut of grass, its thatch so rough that the long sleeves of my robe are always wet with dew. Poem 2 by Empress Jito, who reigned from 690 to 697. Haru sugite natsuki ni ke rashi shiro no koromo hosu ama no kagu yama. Okay, this is one of the more famous poems in the collection. It's often commented upon. The translation is, spring has gone away and summer come. Okay, there's the kigo right there, summer, so you know it's a summer poem. It would seem from those white hemp robes laid to dry in the sunlight on Kagu's heavenly hill. Poem 3 by the great Manyoshu poet Kakinomoto no Hitomaro, who flourished between 680 and 700, and who's the main poet of the Manyoshu collection. This is a love poem, a koi dai topic. Ashibiki no. Okay, so we start with the makura kotoba there. Ashibiki no yamadori no o no shidari o no naga naga shi o hitori kamo nen. Long as the long tail of pheasants of the mountains, foot-wearying hills, so long is the night before me when I must spend it alone. Poem number 4 is a winter poem now. So we skipped over autumn, now we're in winter. By Yamabe no Akahito, who's also one of the major poets in the Manyoshu, early 8th centuries when he flourished. Tago no ura ni uchi ide te mire ba shiro no Fuji no Takane ni yuki wa furi tsutsu. The translation, at Tagobe I came out and looked afar to see the hemp white of Mount Fuji's lofty peak under a flurry of snow. Poem number 5 by Sarumadu Taiyu, who flourished in the late 9th century. Oku yama ni momiji fumi wake naku shika no Koe kiku tokizo aki wa kanaしき. Deep back in the hills a stag walks through red leaves calling for his mate, and ah, when I hear his voice, how forlorn the autumn seems. Poem number 6 is a winter poem. Bridge made by magpie wings is a conventional metaphor for the Milky Way. Keep that in mind as you read this. Ka saさぎのわたせる橋におく霜の 白きを見れば夜ぞふけにける. Middle counselor Otomo no Yakamochi, who's also one of the major poets of the Maiyoshu, wrote this one. And the translation, when I see the white of frost covering the bridge made by magpie wings to traverse the high heavens, then I know the night is late. Poem number 7. This is a tabi, or travel, topic poem, composed in China in 753 at a farewell party before his return to Japan after more than 30 years. And the poet is Abe no Nakamaro, who lived from 701 to 770. We're still in the pre-Heian period here, in the Nara period. Ama no hara, furi sake mireba, kasuga naru, mikasa no yama ni ide shitsuki kamo. Raising my eyes to the broad plain of heaven, I see the same moon that shone at Mount Mikasa in Kasuga, far away. Poem number 8, Monk Jakudeng, who's now regarded as an obscure figure, but at the time, Kinotsudayuki, who's the prominent poet, the main poet and compiler in the Kokinshu, who also wrote the preface to the Kokinshu, he regards Monk Jakudeng as one of the 6 geniuses of Japanese poetry, the Rokkasen. And this is a zo, or written with the kanji for zatsu, you will remember, a miscellaneous poem, a poem that does not fall into any of the major categories, whether seasonal categories or koi or laments and so forth. The place name Uji is homophonous with uji, meaning bitter or painful. So keep that in mind. There's a kakikotoba, a kind of pun taking place here with the word uji. And Monk Jakudeng's poem is Waga iyo wa miyako no tatsumi shikazo sumu yo uji yama to hito wa iyu nari. In my little hut southeast of the capital, I live as I wish, and yet I hear this place called Ujiyama, bitter hills. Poem number 9 by the famed female poet Ono no Komachi, who flourished around 850. Hana no iro wa, this is probably the most famous poem in the whole collection. Hana no iro wa utsuri ni keri na itazura ni waga miyo ni furu nagamese shima ni. Behold my flower, its beauty wasted away on idle concerns that have kept me gazing out as time coursed by with the rains. Poem 10 by Semimaru, a recluse who supposedly lived near Aosaka Meeting Hill. This is a zo, or miscellaneous poem. And Semimaru flourished probably in the 10th century, and his poem is the following. Korde ya kono yuku mo kaeru mo wakarete wa shiru mo shiranu mo Osaka no seki. Here it is, the gate where people coming and going must part company, where both friends and strangers meet on the slopes of Meeting Hill. Poem 11, Tabi. It's a tabi dai, a travel topic. This was written by consultant Ono no Takamura, who was sent to his family when he was heading into exile on the island of Oki. The 80 Isles, Yasoshima, is a metaphor for the Japanese islands. Keep that in mind, the phrase Yasoshima. And his poem is as follows. Wata no hara, Yasoshima kakete, kogi idenu to 人には告げよ、天の釣り船. You on your fishing boats, please tell this to my loved ones, that my boat has passed safely through the 80 isles on the broad plain of the sea. Poem 12. This is a zo, or miscellaneous topic poem, by Archbishop Henjo, who lived 816 to 890. Amatsukaze, kumo no kayoiji, fuki toji yo, otome no sugata, shibashi todomemu. O winds from on high, blow shut that path through the clouds and make these maids stay. I would gaze a moment more on their heavenly shapes. Okay, and there's a note there provided by Clark. What does he say here? Composed at court when he was watching a performance of the Gosechi dancers, daughters of court dancers who provided entertainment during the Thanksgiving services of the 11th month. Remember, the 11th month, this is all in the lunar calendar, so the 11th month is not November in the Gregorian calendar. 420. Next poem, poem 13, is a koi poem. Remember, 45 or so of the total 100 poems are koi poems, love poems, sent to an imperial princess, by retired Emperor Yose, who reigned 877 to 884. And the poem is Tsukubane no Mine yori otsuru mina no kawa, koi zo tsumorite fuchi to narinuru. From Tsukuba Peak, water falls down to become Mina River's flow, just as my small love has grown into a deepening pool. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, but of course this is the same Ogura Hyakunin Isshu collection that is printed on the Uta Karuta card game that has been played since antiquity and is still played today at the New Year's festivities. Right, it's a card game. Most Japanese have still memorized these waka, and they play a card game where they identify the card and do all that stuff. So it's usually, this collection is usually associated with that game, and it's sometimes forgotten that this is one of the great masterpieces of Japanese literature, which is what we want to focus on in this course. Poem 14 is a koi, dai, or a love topic poem, written by the Kawada minister of the left, Minamoto no Toru, right? Minamoto clan. Remember, they rise to power and they eventually take over and defeat the Taira clan and form the Bakufu in the Kamakura period. And this poet is from that clan. Minamoto no Toru lived 822 to 895. Here's the poem, beginning with a reference to the Yamagata, the Tohoku, or northern regions of Japan, and Michinoku. Michinoku no shinobu moji zuri tare yue ni midare some ni shi ware nara naku ni. As wholly confused as cloth dyed in moss fern designed from Michinoku, so distraught is my heart now, and for no one else but you. And as the note says, shinobu moji zuri refers to an ancient dyeing process in which shinobu, a kind of fern, was rubbed into cloth, creating a confused pattern. Poem 15 is a haru, or spring poem, sent to someone with a gift of wakana, young edible sprouts gathered in the fields each spring. The poem is by Emperor Ko, who reigned 884 to 887. Kimi ga tame, haru no ni idete waka natsumu, waga koro mo ni yuki wa furi tsutsu. It was just for you that I went to the spring fields to pick these young greens, and all the while on my sleeves the snow kept falling. Poem 16 by Middle Counselor Adiwara no Yukihira, who lived 818 to 893, and Yukihira was the famous Adiwara no Narihira's brother, who is possibly the author of the Issei Monogatari, which we've already read. And this was composed when he was appointed to serve as governor of Inaba province. The poem is as follows: Tachi wakare Inaba no yama no mine ni ouru, matsutoshi ka kikaba ima kaeri kon. I must depart now for the pines that await me at Mount Inaba. But should I hear that you too pine, I will hurry back to you. Okay, so we see that famous word matsu, which can mean either to wait or to pine, and also a pine as in a pine tree, used in the double sense here, matsu to shi kikaba. Matsu is probably the most frequently employed kake kotoba in classical Japanese poetry. We'll talk about that more in the study guide and in the second video, where we delve into this a little more deeply. Poem 17 is an Aki poem, an autumn poem, composed for a screen painting representing autumn leaves on the Tatsita River. In tie-dyeing, the cloth is twisted in order to make bands of different shades of color. And this poem is by the famous Adiwara no Narihira, who's the famous lover boy poet who's the subject of many of the Ise Monogatari episodes. Adiwara no Narihira lived 825 to 880. Here's his poem. Chi ha yaburu, kami yo mo kikazu, tatsu daga wa, kara kurenai ni mizu kukuru to wa. Not even in the age of the mighty gods of old was such a thing known. Tatsuda's waters tie-dyed with leaf bands of Chinese red. Chinese red is kara kurenai. Kara, of course, means China. Kara bito. Next poem, 18. Koi, or a love poem, written for a poem contest by Fujiwara no Toshiyuki, who died 901. And the poem is as follows. Sumi no e no kishi ni yoru nami yoru sae ya yume no kayoi ji hitome yokuramu. At Suminoe, waves come to shore day and night, but you come neither, afraid that even on dream paths you might possibly be seen. Poem number 19 is by Lady Ise, a lady in waiting to the consort of Emperor Uda. And she flourished in around 930. She later became his mistress. This is, again, a love poem. Remember, when a koi poem appears in most Japanese waka collections, they appear in a sequence of 2 or 3 or 4 in a row. So that's what we're seeing here. Here's her poem. Nani wagata, mijikaki ashi no fuchi no ma mo awa de kono yo o sugu shite yo to ya. What are you saying? That I cannot meet you, not even for a time brief as the space between joints on the reeds at Naniwa? And Naniwa is, of course, the area in what is today Osaka. Next poem is poem 20 by Prince Motoyoshi, who's the son of Emperor Yose, who wrote the poem above that we just read, 7 poems previously. This was sent to a lady after their secret relationship had become known. Okay, this is a famous poem. I think I talk about this in my Nakanishi translation in the book. We talk about this channel Bowie. I think there's a chapter in that book about this word. Miyotsuku. Okay. The poem is Wabi nureba, ima hata onaji nani wa naru, miyotsuku shite mo awamu tozo omou. Like a channel buoy bobbing off Naniwa strand, my name is tossed about. But still I will come to you, though it be death to proceed. Okay. So the poet is saying, even though he's been discovered and everyone now knows that he's her lover, he's still willing to risk death even to continue their affair. Poem 21, Love, Koi. The 9th month was the long month according to the custom. Right? So we see the word Nagatsuki in this poem. Nagatsuki is the 9th month in the lunar calendar. This is by Monk Jakudeng, late 9th century. And the poem is Ima komu to, Isshu bakari ni Nagatsuki no ariyake no tsuki yo machi ide tsuru kana. Because you promised you would be coming at once, I waited all night, even then greeting only the moon of a 9th month dawn. Poem 22 by Funya no Yasuhide of the late 9th century. And Funya no Yasuhide was a contemporary of Ono no Komachi, one of Tsudayuki's 6 poetic geniuses that we mentioned above, the Rokgasseng. This is an autumn or aki poem topic, written for a poem contest. The word arashi here, or storm, a storm wind, is homophonous with the stem of the word adu, right? To be withered or to be rough. So there's a little kakekotaba wordplay taking place here. The poem is as follows. Fukukara ni aki no kusaki no shiorureba, mube yama kaze yo arashi to yu ran. As soon as it blows, the autumn trees and grasses begin to wither. Not for nothing do they name it Witherer, this mountain wind. Next poem 23, poem 23 by Oe no Chisato of the late 9th century, a major court poet during the reign of Emperor Uda. Written for a poem contest. This is an autumn poem. And note, again, as I mentioned above, these poems are all examples of ushin poems, rather than mushin poems, which emphasize wordplay and clever conceit and so forth. Ushin, by contrast, emphasize sort of purity of heart, or the emotion, or the content of the poem, rather than sort of wordplay, which can often devolve into frivolity. This exactly what this this collection, and what Fujiwara Teika wants to avoid in this collection. And Oe no Chisato's poem here is Tsuki mireba, chiji ni mono koso kanashike de, wagami hitotsu no aki ni wa ara ne to. Looking at the moon, I feel the sadness in things everywhere around, even knowing that autumn does not come for me alone. Next poem, 24, is a tabi poem, travel, composed at Tamukeyama, or Offering Hill, when he accompanied retired Emperor Uda on a journey to Nara. This poem is by the famous Sugawara no Michizane. We'll talk about him more in detail in the study guide. Underline his name for now. I'll let you know who the more prominent or famous poets are in this collection as we go along. This is definitely one of them. Underline it. He lived from 845 to 903. And his poem is as follows. Travel poem. Kono tabi wa nusa mo toriaezu tamukeyama, momiji no nishiki kami no mani mani. And the translation is, before this journey I had no time for prayer strips, so gods, accept instead that brocade of autumn leaves on the slopes of Offering Hill. Poem 25 is a love poem, love topic, sent to a woman. Sane kazura, kazura means vines, sane kazura means secret vines, is employed here for the metaphorical possibilities of its name, as Carter points out in the note. The Sanjo minister of the right, Fujiwara no Sadakata. Okay, and again, in the study guide I'll have some information about the Fujiwara clan, who basically ruled or reigned or governed the world of the Heian court for this period from behind the scenes, through the strategy of marrying off their daughters. Through strategic marriage. Okay, it's so hot in here, my jacket is drenched in sweat, so I'm going to have to take off my jacket and use the microphone. And the Fujiwara no Sadakata, who lived 873 to 932, the poem is as follows. Nani shi owaba, ao sakayama no sane kazura, hito ni shirare de kuru yoshimo ga na. Translation, if true to their name, these secret vines, or sane kazura, I send you from Meeting Hill, may wind me away to you unseen by the eyes of men. Okay, Meeting Hill is Sakayama. Alright, moving on to now we have as it says there, the Sugawara no Michizane poem that we just read above is included in the Kokinshu. Right? So a lot of these poems that are in here, I don't know if it's a lot, but at least I would several or a dozen or so poems are taken from the Kokinshu. And remember that Fujiwara no Teiga, the compiler of this collection, was very anti-Shinkokinshu. So Shinkokinshu, Shinkokin Wakashu represented a kind of new sensibility, and he was very much opposed to this, and he sought to return to a previous age of poetic sensibility. Poem number 26 is by Lord Teishin, Fujiwara no Tadahira, who lived 880 to 949. And this is an autumn poem composed at the request of the retired Emperor Uda as an invitation to his son, Emperor Daigo, to join him on a visit to the Oi River. Emperor Daigo of the Heian period, early Heian period, first half of the Heian period. And the poem is as follows: Ogura Yama. Ogura, of course, is the same Ogura near Kyoto. That is the title of this collection. Ogura Yama. Mine no momiji ba kokoro araba. Ima hito tabi no miyuki mata nan. You autumn leaves on the slopes at Ogura, if you have a heart, put off your falling this once till the emperor's visit. Okay, poem 27 now is a love poem. Koi, the name of the river Izumigawa, acts as a pun in this poem. Itsu, when, and mi, see. Itsu, mi, when will you see? Namely Izumigawa. There's a pun going on here, Kaki Kotoba. And the poem is by middle counselor Fujiwara no Kanesuke. So another one from the Fujiwara clan. Lived 877 to 933. And the poem is as follows: Mika no hara wakite nagaruru Izumigawa. Itsu miki tote ka koi shikarudan. From the Mika more waters gush forth to become Wensi River. Right? Wensi River is Tsumigawa. But just when did I see you, that I should be so in love? And the next poem is by the grandson of Emperor Koko, Minamoto no Muneyuki. So somebody from the Minamoto clan that would take over later at the end of the Heian period and rule from Kamakura onward, or from during the Kamakura period. Died in 939. His poem is as follows: Yamazato wa fuyu zo sabishisa masarikeru hitome mo kusa mo karenu to omoeba. Poem 29. Autumn. Topic: white chrysanthemums. O Shikochi no Mitsune, who died around 925, possibly, we don't know. His poem is as follows. Kokoro ate ni oraba ya oran hatsishimono. Oki mado waseru shiragiku no hana. What else can I do but make a guess and pick one? Beneath the first frost, one cannot be sure just which are the white chrysanthemums. Poem number 30 by Mibu no Tadamine, who is one of the compilers of the Kokinshu. And this, he was born around 850. His poem, which is a love poem, koi, love topic, is as follows: Ari ake no tsure naku mieshi wakare yori akatsuki bakari ukimono wa nashi. Since that parting, when I saw that distant look in the late moon's glare, nothing seems more cruel to me than the hours before dawn. Poem 31, Winter Poem, by Sakanoue no Korenori, early 10th century. And there's a head note to this poem, which Carter includes in the little side note. Written when he saw snow falling on a trip to Yamato province, the Yamato no Kuni, around the Nara area. And the poem is: Asaborake, Ariake no tsuki to miru made ni, Yoshino no sato ni fureru shirayuki. In the early light, one could almost mistake it for moon rays at dawn. White snow falling down at Yoshino village. Okay, so this kind of elegant confusion of moon rays with snow, or at other times with falling petals for snow, is something that you see in the Kokinshu poems as well. Okay, so here moon rays at dawn and white snow falling are kind of conflated or confused. Next poem is by Harumichi no Tsuraki, who died 920. This is an autumn poem with the head note written at Shiga Pass on fishing weirs. See the note, okay, fishing weirs. I think we have a chapter in my Nakanishi book about these fishing weirs, which are in Japanese aenu, I think. No. What is the word in Japanese? Yamakawa? Okay, here's the poem. Let's read the poem first. Yamakawa ni kaze no kaketaru shigadami wa nagare mo aenu momiji nari keri. In this mountain stream, the winds have constructed a fishing weir, halting the flow downstream of the autumn leaves. Okay, we'll have to look at the note about fishing weirs later. Next poem, poem 33, is by Kino Tomonori, who is the famous Kino Tsurayuki's cousin, one of the compilers of the Kokinshu, along with Kino Tsurayuki. He died before 905, probably. This is a spring poem with the head note, written when he saw cherry blossoms falling. Okay, spring, so whenever you see cherry blossoms in a poem, referred to in a poem, you know that it is a spring poem, because that is a kigo, a seasonal word. Hisakata no. So it begins with this makura kotoba. One of the most famous makura kotoba is hisakata no, and it precedes the noun, sort of an epithet that precedes a light image in this case. Okay, so hisakata no hikari no dokeki haru no hi ni shizu kokoro naku hana no chiru dan. On a peaceful day so warm in the tranquil light of the springtime sun, how is it that the blossoms fall with so little sense of calm? Poem 34, miscellaneous, a Zou topic, by Fujiwara no Okikaze, early 10th century. Early 10th century, first the Japanese. Tadeoka mo shiru hito ni sen takasago no matsu mo mukashi no tomo nara naku ni. The translation, who is there left now that can claim to know me well? Takasago's pines are venerable, of course, but they are hardly old friends. Next is by arguably the most famous waka poet of the Heian period, Kino Tsurayuki, who lived circa 872 to 945. And this is a spring poem written when, after not visiting for a long time, he stopped at an inn in Hase, where he had always stayed when on pilgrimage to the Hase temple, Hase-dera temple. When the proprietor said that the inn was there as always for him, Tsurayuki broke off a branch from a plum tree standing nearby and composed this poem. Hito wa isa, kokoro mo shidazu, furusato wa hanazo mukashi no ka ni niyoi keru. About the people living on in this old place I cannot be sure, but the plum blossoms at least have the scent of long ago. Next poem, poem 36, by Kiyowara no Fuka Yabu, early 10th century, with the head note, written toward dawn when the moon was particularly captivating. And this poem is as follows. Natsu no yo wa. This is a summer poem. Natsu no yo wa mada yoi nagara ake nuru o kumo no izuku ni tsuki yadoru ramu. And the translation for this is, on this summer eve, a new dawn seems to begin before night is done. But in which of those clouds has the moon found a lodging? Alright, poem 37, by Funya no Asayasu, the son of Yasuhide, whose poem we just read above, of the late 9th century, and this is a topic unknown, it says in the headnote, but it's an autumn poem since there's an autumn or kigo image included, kigo word, seasonal autumn word here. Shiratsuyu ni kaze no fukishiku aki no no wa tsuranuki tomenu tamazochi dikeru. Pure white drops of dew blown across the autumn moor by a steady wind are scattering everywhere, jewels without a string. Poem 38 now is by Lady Ukon, lady in waiting to the consort of Emperor Daigo. This is a love poem with the headnote topic unknown. Lady Ukon of the mid-10th century, and the poem is Wasurdade. Miyoba omowazu chikai teshi hito no inochi no oshiku mo aru kana. Oshiku mo aru kana. So there's a Giamari going on there in that one. And the translation, I am forsaken, but about myself I don't care. Instead I must fear for the life you swore away when we made our vows of love. Poem 39 is a love poem with the headnote sent to someone. That's it. Shino, which appears in the poem, is a slender bamboo plant whose name is a partial homophone of the verb shinobu, to yearn in secret. So again, there's a kake kotoba, wordplay going on here. This poem is by consultant Minamoto no Hitoshi, 880 to 951 he lived. He's one of the Minamoto clan poets in this collection, and the poem is as follows. Asajifu no ono no shi no hara shinoburedo amarite nado ga hito no koishiki. Like yearning bamboo hidden in the grassy fields, I longed in secret. Why now has my love for you become more than I can hide? Poem 40 is by Taira no Kanemori. So the great rival of the Minamoto clan is the Taira clan, and this poet is from the Taira clan, which would eventually be defeated. Taira no Kanemori died in 990, and his poem is as follows. Shinoburedo, iro ni ide ni keri, waga koi wa mono ya omou to hito no tou made. I yearn in secret, but the truth of my passion must show in my face, so much so that someone asks if there is something on my mind. Poem number 41 by Mibuno Tadami of the mid-10th century. He's the son of Tadamine. This is a love poem written for a poem contest. Koi su cho waga na wa madaki tachi nikeri hito shidezu koso omoi someshi ga. A man in love, that is what people call me already, it seems, and I'm just beginning to have feelings I have told no one. Poem 42. This is by Kiyowara no Motosuke, 908 to 990 are his dates. He's the father of Sei Shonagon, whose famous Makura Soshi we have already read in this class. Poem 496. He wrote, Sei Shonagon's poem is included in this as well, so the daughter and the father are both in this collection. He is one of the compilers of the Gosenshu, one of the major poetry anthologies of the mid-Heian period. This is a love poem. So again, love poems appear in sequence. This is the second, I think, in the sequence, with the headnote written by proxy for a man whose lover had turned cold toward him. And the poem is Chigiriki na katami ni sode yo shibori tsutsu sue no matsuyama nami kosaji to wa. Have you forgotten wringing tears from our sleeves, vowing that our love would stand high above the waves like Pine Mountain in Sue? Poem number 43 is also a love poem by Middle Counselor Fujiwara no Atsutada, 906 to 943 are his dates, and this is love poem but a topic unknown. It says in the headnote, Ai mite no nochi no kokoro ni kudabureba mukashi wa mono wo omowazari keri. Compared with the way my heart longs for you now after we have met, those yearnings I had before seem like nothing at all. Poem 44 by son of Sadakata, Middle Counselor Fujiwara no Asatada, 910 to 966, written for a poem contest, and this again is another love, fourth in the sequence, I think. Ao koto no taete shinaku wa nakanaka ni hito mo mimo omo hito mo mimo miyomo uramizaramashi. If our meetings were to get altogether to cease, then my resentment toward you and toward myself might come to an end as well. Poem number 45 is a love poem sent to a woman who had turned cold toward him. This is by Lord Kentoku, i.e. Fujiwara no Kore Tada, 924 to 972, and his poem is as follows. Aware tomo, yu beki hito wa omou ue de, mi no itazura ni narinu beki ka na. I can't even think of a soul who might tell me how I pity you, and so I go on living, but wasting my life away. Poem 46, another love poem. I think this is the fifth in the sequence. Head note, topic unknown, by Sone no Yoshitada, who flourished in toward the end of the 10th century. Yuda no to o wataru funabi to kaji o tae, yukue mo shiranu koi no michi kana. Over Yuda Bar go fishermen in their boats, oarless, just drifting with no more sense of direction than have I on my path of love. Poem 47, Autumn, composed on the topic Autumn visiting a rundown house at the Kawada estate. The once grand estate built by Minamoto Toru was by then a ruin choked by vines and thickets. Minamoto Toru's poem we've already read above at the beginning of this collection. This poem is by Monk Jakudeng of the late 10th century. His poem is Yae Mugurda, Shigederu Yado no Sabishiki ni Hito koso miene Aki wa ki ni keri. Here I sit alone in a house quite overgrown with mugura vines, where no one pays me a visit. Only the autumn has come. Poem number 48 is another love poem, written for a 100-poem sequence by Minamoto no Shigeyuki, who died around 1000. Kaze o itami, iwa utsu nami no onore no mi, kudakete mono o omou koro kana. Like waves in the wind that throws them against the rocks, so my rejection leaves my own heart shattered whenever I long for you. Poem 49 is by O Nakatomi no Yoshinobu, 921 to 991. He is one of the compilers of the Gosenshu, the other great collection of the Heian period. This is a love poem too, with the headnote topic unknown. Guards kept watchfires burning outside the outer enclosure of the palace at all night, is the note that Carter provides, background information about the guards. It's described in this poem, and the poem is as follows. Mikaki mori, eji no takuhi no yoru wa moe, hiru wa kie tsutsu mono o kose o moe. Mono o koso o moe. Giamatti there in the last line, last stanza of this poem. Translation: as watchmen's fires that blaze around the palace in the dark of night but nearly perish in the day, so burns the fire of my passion. And another poem, poem 50, by Fujiwara no Yoshitaka, who's the son of Kore Tada, and this is a love poem as well. Headnote: sent to a woman after returning from her chambers. Alright, this is a custom. You go to a woman's chambers, you leave her chambers before dawn, because it's uncouth to wait till dawn to return home, and then you send her a poem, such as this one. And the poem is as follows. Kimi ga tame, oshikarazari shi inochi sae, nagaku mo ga na to omoi keru ka na? The life that before I would gladly have given just to be with you, now I find myself wanting it only to go on and on. Alright, we'll take a little break at the poem 50 mark, and we will continue from poem 51 onward after the break. Okay, no time for breaks. Let's just get through this as quickly as possible. I'm going to pick up the speed a little bit so we can get through it. Poem 51 by Fujiwara no Sanetaka, died 999, the great-grandson of Tadahida, who wrote the above poem. This too is a love poem with the head note sent to a woman for the first time. Mogusa, which is referred to in the poem, was burned on the skin to treat various illnesses. Kaku todani eya wa ibuki no sashi mogusa, sashi moshiraji na moyuru omoi yo. The translation, so do I love you, but how can I find the words to tell you I learn like ibuki's moxa weeds, consuming me from within. Poem 52, another love poem. Head note. Okay, so we've continued beyond the usual 5. I think the rule that you should only continue a love sequence for 5 poems max was developed in later period. Here I think we're on 7 or 8 of this sequence. Fujiwara no Michinobu, who lived 792-94, very short life, writes this love poem with the head note, sent to a woman after returning from her chambers. So again, after a poem sent to a woman after a night of hot love on a snowy day. And his poem is as follows: Ake nureba kururu mono to wa shiri nagara nao urameshiki asaborake kana. That every new dawn leads to another nightfall, yes, this I know. Yet still how much I resent the first faint light of day. Poem 53 by the mother of Captain of the Right Michitsuna, who lived approximately 936 to 995. She is, of course, the famous author of the famous work, the Kagero Nikki, one of the great works of Heian period literature, the Gossamer Journal of the late 10th century. This is a love poem, koi poem, sent to her husband, the regent Fujiwara no Kanei, when he complained about being kept waiting outside her gate after coming home late one night. The poem is Nageki tsutsu hitori nuruyo no akuruma wa ika ni hisashiki mono toka wa shiru. When one lies alone lamenting the whole night through until break of day, how slowly the time goes by. Ah, but yes, you wouldn't know. Okay, poem number 54. Now we have 54, let's get to this as quickly as possible. Form 54 is another love poem sent after the first visit of her new husband. This is written by the mother of Provisional Minister Gido. She died around 996. And the poem is Wasureji no yukusue made wa katakereba kyou kagiri no inochi tomo ga na. To never forsake is a vow so hard to keep, and so long a time. Almost you make me wish today the last of my life. Poem 55 by Major Counselor Fujiwara no Kinto, 966-1041, who is the compiler of the Isshu and the Wakang Doe Shu, very famous poet and compiler and editor. This is a zo, or miscellaneous topic poem, written when a group of courtiers visited an old waterfall. The first line of the Isshu version reads Taki no ito wa. Okay, so this is included as the first line of the Isshu with a slightly different wording. Taki no oto wa. So the ito becomes oto here. Taki no oto wa taete hisashiku narinu dedo. Na koso nagarete nao kikoe kede. The waterfall's sound faded into nothingness a long time ago, but its name has come down still to be heard today. Okay, the next poem is by the very famous Izumi Shikibu, who flourished 970 to 1030. And Izumi Shikibu, this is a love poem with a head note sent to someone when she was gravely ill. Arda zadan, kono yo no hoka no omoide ni ima hitotabi no ao koto mo ga na. In last remembrance of the world I soon must leave to return no more. This is what I most desire, one final meeting with you. And Murasaki Shikibu, of course, the great female writer, author of Genji Monogatari, flourished 996 to 1010. She was a lady in waiting to Shoshi, the consort of Emperor Ichijo of the late 9th, who reigned late 10th century, early 11th century. This is a zo, or miscellaneous poem, written after a brief reunion with a childhood friend. And the poem is Meguri aite mishi ya sore tomo wakanu ma ni kumo gakure nishi yowa no tsuki kage. Quite by chance we met, and then before I was sure who it really was, the moonlight had disappeared, hidden behind midnight clouds. Okay. Tsukikage. Next poem is 58 by Murasaki Shikibu's daughter, Daini no Sammi, of the early 11th century. This is a love poem with the head note, written when a man who had become aloof asked why she had changed toward him. Arima yama, ina no sasahara kaze fukeba, ide soyo hito o wasude yaba suru. Near Ardima Hill, the wind through Ina's bamboos blows constantly, and just as constant am I in my resolve not to forget. Okay, the next poem, 59, by Akazome Emon of the early 11th century. She's reputed to be the author of Eiga Monogatari, The Tale of Flowering Fortunes, translated into English by McAuliffe, I think, a few decades ago. This is a love poem, written on behalf of her sister, whose husband had not kept his promise to visit. Yasuda wade nenamashi mono o sayo fukete katabuku made no tsukiyomi shikana. I could just as well have slept instead of waiting late into the night, but here I am, up to see the setting of the moon. Poem number 60 by Koshikibu no Naishi, who is the daughter of Izumi Shikibu, who just wrote the above poem, and she died, Koshikibu no Naishi died 1025. This is a zo, or miscellaneous poem, composed when Fujiwara no Sadayori, the author of the above, or of a poem just shortly after this one, composed when Fujiwara no Sadayori playfully accused her of sending away to her mother in Tango province for a poem to enter as her own in a poem contest. The poem turns on a pun, or kake kotoba, involving the word fumi, which is a pivot word, kake kotoba, meaning both letter, fumi, right, bun, or bungaku, and to walk on, with a different kanji can mean fumi tsukeru, right, funzugeru. O e yama, ikuno no michi no to o kakereba, mada fumi momizu ama no hashi date. Mother is away past Oe and Ikuno, near heaven's ladder, whence would come her letter, but neither have I yet seen. Okay, next is poem 61 by Issei no Taiyu, who flourished at 1008 to 1060. She is the granddaughter of O Nakatomi no Yoshinobu, who wrote one of the above poems. She's a lady in waiting to Empress Shoshi, and this is a spring poem written when someone presented 8-fold cherries from Nara as a gift. Yaezakura is a variety of wild cherry with 8-petaled blossoms. The 9-fold palace courts, Kokonoe, refers to the imperial palace compound. And the poem is Inishie no Nara no miyako no yaezakura Kyo koko no ue ni nioi nuru kana. Anciently they blossomed in the Nara capital, these 8-fold cherries now displaying their colors in the 9-fold palace courts. Next poem is poem 62 by Isshu Nagon, author of Makuda Soshi, which we've read in this class. This might be her second poem, I thought. Alright, we'll have to look at that later. She's a lady in waiting to Teishi, consort of Emperor Ichijo, Kiyowara Motosuke's daughter of one of the above poems, and Kiyowara Fukuba's great daughter, which was one of the above poems. This is a zo, or miscellaneous poem, The poem alludes to an ancient Chinese story. There's a note about that in Carter's book. Yo komete tori no sodane wa hakaru tomo yo ni au saka no seki wa yurusaji. Try if you wish to fool others with rooster calls in the depths of night, but still close to your passage will be the gate at Meeting Hill. Aosaka, so we've seen this Meeting Hill a few times. Aosaka and Aosaka Yama appear a few times in this collection. Moving on, poem 63 is by Fujiwara no Michimasa, master of the left capital, lived 992-1053. This is a love poem, composed when it became impossible to see a woman he had been visiting in secret. Ima wa tada, omoi taenan, to bakari o hitozute narade, yu yoshimo ga na. Now, yes, even now, I would like to have a way to say at least this, and not by a messenger, that I have now given up. Poem 64, winter poem by middle counselor Fujiwara no Sadayori, 995-1045, on weirs. The note to the poem, see the note, okay, weirs, fishing weirs, we've already talked about, written when he traveled to Uji. And the poem is as follows. I'll read the English translation first here. In morning's first light, the mists on Uji River are all breaks and gaps, and appearing everywhere, bamboo stakes of fishing weirs. Ajirogi, that's the word for weirs, yes, that we talk about in my Nakanishi books. And the original for this poem is Asaborake. Uji no kawagiri taedae ni araware wataru seze no ajirogi. Ajirogi, the fishing weirs. Next poem 65 by the lady in waiting to a princess, Lady Sagami, Flores 1035-1061. This is another love poem written for a poem contest originally. Urami wabi hosanu sodeda ni aru mono o koi ni kuchi na koso oshikere. And the Carter's translation is, anger and sorrow have made my never dry sleeves a complete ruin, but still more hateful to me is love's ruin of my good name. Poem 66 is a zo, or miscellaneous poem with the head note, written at Oomine when he saw a cherry tree in bloom where he didn't expect one, by Major Archbishop Gyosong. Okay, so a Buddhist priest. There are several Buddhist priests included in this collection, of course. Gyosong is one of them, lived 1055 to 1135. The poem is Moro tomo ni aware to omoe yamazakura hana yori hoka ni shiru hito mo nashi. And the translation here is, can't we both agree to care for one another, mountain cherry tree? For outside of your blossoms, no one knows me here at all. Okay, the next poem, poem 67, is by Suo no Naishi of the late 11th century, a lady in waiting in the courts of emperors Shirakawa and Horikawa. This is a miscellaneous poem composed on a moonlit night when Fujiwara no Tadaiye, Shunze's grandfather, overhearing her whisper to a lady nearby that she would like to have a pillow, playfully offered his arm as a substitute. Remember, arm for pillow is a common word in classical Japanese waka poetry. Tamakura is the word. And it appears in this poem too. Haru no yono, yume bakari naru tamakura ni kai naku tatang na koso oshikere. Okay, next poem is poem 68, a miscellaneous poem by retired Emperor Sanjo, who reigned 1011 to 1016, with a head note written when he saw the moon shining brightly around the time when he decided to retire as emperor because of illness. Okay, so I should have mentioned this earlier, but note that the head notes are not written by the poet themselves, of course. They're written by the editor or compiler of the collection, who's providing some sort of specific context about the situation in which the poem was originally written. 心にも荒で浮世へ行く浮世に流れば恋しかるべき夜の月かな。If against my will I should live on to look back on this vexing world, I shall remember fondly this moon shining in the night. Ukiyo. Okay, ukiyo of course is the ukiyo of ukiyo-e, floating world pictures of the late Edo period, second half of the Edo period. Ukiyo eventually came to mean floating world, but in the beginning, in the classical period of course, ukiyo meant vexing world, or sad world, or pathetic world, right? Carter translates it as vexing world here. Moving on, poem 69, an autumn poem by another monk, probably the most famous monk of the Heian period, one of the most famous poet monks of the Heian period, Knowing 988 1050. This is autumn poem originally written for a poem contest, and it includes a honkadori, an elusive variation. Honkadori is an important technique that sort of reached its peak in the Shinkokinshu period, but it was still employed before Shinkokinshu in the late or early 11th century, as in this poem. Elusive variation poem on Kokinshu, poems 283 and 284. Okay, the poem is as follows. Monk Knowing. Arashi fuku, Mimurdo no yama no momiji wa, Tatsuya no kawa no nishiki narikeri. Okay. And the translation, the winds of a storm blowing on Mount Mimuro have brought autumn leaves down to Tatsuta River and made it a rich brocade. So Tatsuta no kawa or Tatsuta gawa, this is the second or third appearance of this river that we've seen in this collection. Poem 70, Autumn, by another monk, Ryozen of the mid-11th century, with the headnote topic unknown. The poem is Sabisa ni yado o tachi idete nagamureba izuku mo onaji aki no yugu de. Out of loneliness I got up and left my hut just to look around, but outside it was the same, autumn evening everywhere. Okay, so autumn there obviously makes it, autumn is a kigo, seasonal word. So autumn specifies the seasonal, the season of the poem there in the end, making it an autumn poem. Poem number 71, written by Major Counselor Minamoto no Tsunenobu, 1016 to 1097. He's the father of Minamoto no Toshiyori, who writes one of the following poems that comes after this. This is an autumn poem with the headnote, written on autumn wind at a house in the paddies, when people gathered at a mountain village of Minamoto no Morokata in Umeze. Okay, so this poem has lots of references to the Minamoto clan, who's slowly rising in their strength and will eventually take over at the end of this period. The poem is as follows. Yu sardeba, kadota no inaba otozurete, ashi no maruya ni akikaze zo fuku. So we see a what is it called? When evening falls, the rice plants out near my gate make a rustling sound. Then through my weed-thatched hut comes a gust of autumn wind. Kakari musubi. We see at the final line of this poem with the zo. Again, because we have a kakari musubi there, the zo makes it, you have to end the final verb in shushike rather than renyoke. Shushike or rentaike. Fuku, at any rate. The fuku is in that form because the kakari musubi zo is included right before it. 72. Poem 72 is a love poem by Lady Kii, florist 1061 to 1113. This is a reply in a contest to a poem written by Fujiwara Teika's grandfather, Fujiwara Toshitada, where he says he would like to come to his love like waves brought by the wind against a rough shore. Okay, and the poem is as follows. This is a reply to that poem. And it is as follows. 音に聞く高しの浜のあだ波は掛け地や袖の濡れもこそすれ These frivolous waves for which the Takashi strand is so justly famous, I dare not go too near them for fear of drenching my sleeves. This is possibly a rather erotic response to Toshi Tada's possibly erotic waka. Things are getting pretty hot here. It's getting hot in here. For the next poem, poem 73, by the Confucian scholar, provisional middle counselor Oe no Masafusa, 1041-1111. This is a spring poem with a topic looking at cherry blossoms on the hills in the distance. So cherry blossoms immediately should make you aware of the fact that this is a spring poem. Takasago no onoue no sakura, sakura right there. Saki ni keri. Okay, so usually sakura is just referred to as hana, but it's explicitly referred to as sakura here. Keep that in mind. So again, from the beginning. Takasago no onoue no sakura, saki ni keri, toyama no kasumi, tatazumo adanamu. Okay, so even if we didn't have the word hana or the word sakura in this poem, we would still know that it is a haru, or spring poem, from this use of kasumi. Again, kasumi, of course, is one of the major kigo, or seasonal words of spring. Translation, at Takasago, the cherry trees on the peak are all in bloom now. Oh, haze out on the foothills, please don't stand in their way. Okay, next is poem number 74 by Minamoto no Toshiyori, 1055-1129, Praying in Vain to Meet One's Love. Ukarikeru hito hatse no yama oroshi yo, hageshi kare to wa inoranu mono o. Okay, yama oroshi yo. So yo is a kireji there. I haven't been talking about this, but there are a lot of kireji employed in these waka. We'll talk about that more in the study guide and in the second video about this work. And the translation here is, you mountain wind blasts blowing from Hase Temple, Hase Dera. In my prayer I asked for you to sway her my way, not to make her rebuffs more harsh. Poem number 75 is by Fujiwara no Mototoshi, 1060-1142. And this is, he is a poet, contest judge, and scholar. This is a zo, or miscellaneous poem, sent to Chancellor Tadamichi, see the next poem, after a request for his son to be appointed to a priestly office had been ignored. Okay. Sent to, okay. Chigiri okishi, sasemo ga tsuyu o, inochi ni te, aware kotoshi no aki mo inu medi. Your promise to me was the very dew of life to a struggling plant. But alas, now this year too, autumn draws near its end. So this is a good poem you can quote if you or somebody you are close to is expecting a promotion at work and does not get the promotion or raise in salary or so forth. You can quote this poem in order to express your lament. Poem 76 is a zo, or a miscellaneous poem. The topic written, A Distant View Over the Sea, by Fujiwara no Tadamichi, the Hosshoji lay monk and former chancellor. Okay, so this is after he took his vows and became a monk. 1097-1164. Wata no hara, kogi idete mideba, hisakata no. Hisakata no, again, the makura kotoba we see here, preceding the noun kumoi. Hisakata no kumoi ni mayou okitsu shiranami. Okay, hisakata no might be for okitsu, or for shiranami actually. Out on the broad sea I gaze into the distance at what looks like clouds off in the far heavens. So high are the white-capped waves. Poem 77, a love poem with a headnote, topic unknown, by retired Emperor Sutoku, who reigned from 1123 to 1141. Se o hayami, iwa ni sekaru takikawa no warete mo sue ni amamu tozo o mo. In a swift current, a boulder may block the rush of falling water and split streams that in the end will join together again. Poem 78, Winter Poem. Headnote, on plovers at a barrier gate. The poem alludes to descriptions of the scenery in the Summa chapter of Genji Monogatari. So, of course, the Summa chapter is the famous chapter where Genji has been exiled to the sad setting of Summa and laments his plight and fate in that chapter. And this poem is by Minamoto no Kanemasa of the early 12th century. And the poem is as follows. This is a very famous poem about the plovers crying, Awajishima, ka.1230s no naku koe ni ikuyo neza menu suma no sekimori. Those plovers crying between Awaji Isle and land. How many long nights do they keep the gods from sleep at their posts on Suma's shore? Poem 79. Fujiwara no Akisuke, master of the left capital, 1090 to 1155 are his dates. This is an autumn poem written for a 100-poem sequence, a previous 100-poem sequence, and taken from that sequence and put into this sequence as poem number 79. Akikaze ni tanabiku kumo no tae mayori, more izuru tsuki no kage no sayake sa. From behind a rift torn in the high trailing clouds by the autumn wind breaks forth the shining moon, and the clear gleam of its rays. Poem number 80, a love poem written for another previous 100-poem sequence. Taiken Mon-in no Horikawa of the mid-12th century. Nagakadan kokoro mo shidazu kuro kami no midarete kesa wa mono o koso omoe. Another G Amari there. How can I be sure that your heart will never change, with my own feelings as tangled this next morning as my black hair after a sleep? Poem 81 by the nephew of Shunzei, the Gotoku Daiji minister of the left, Fujiwara no Tsanesada, who lived, born 1139, died 1191. This is a summer poem with the topic hearing a cuckoo calling at dawn. Hototogisu. Hototogisu is the cuckoo bird, right? Hototogisu nakitsuru kata o nagamureba tada ariyake no tsukizo no koreru. And translation is, when I turned to look off toward the direction of the cuckoo's call, the only thing left to me was the moon in the dawn sky. Next poem, 81, a love poem with the headnote topic unknown by Monk Jakudeng, who was Fujiwara no Atsuyori, until he took vows and became Doin, born in 1090. Omoi wabi, sate mo inochi wa aru mono o uki ni taenu wa namida na rikeri. Though deep in despair, I have not yet felt my life drained away by love, but less resistant to pain are my ever-flowing tears. Poem 83, miscellaneous poem by Fujiwara no Shunzei, who is a very important poet in the Shinko Ginshu. Fujiwara no Shunzei, who's kind of pioneer in developing an entirely new poetic style that Fujiwara no Teika probably was not fond of, but he included in this anthology nonetheless. Master of the Grand Empress's household office. His years are 1114 to 1204. His poem is extremely famous. Underline this one. Yano naka yo michi koso nake de omoiru. Yama no oku ni mo shika zo naku naru. From this world of ours there is simply no escape. Even in deep hills where I go to flee my cares, I hear the call of a stag. Shikazo naku naru. Poem 84 by Fujiwara no Kiyosuke. Okay, we're getting closer and closer to the present, to the time of the collection's compilation. Fujiwara no Kiyosuke, 1104 to 1177. He's the son of Akisuke. This is a miscellaneous poem with the headnote topic unknown. Nagadaeba. Mata kono goro ya shinobaren ushi to mishi yozo ima wa koishiki. If I should live on, I may yet recall this time with tender feelings. For those times I once thought hard seem now like fond memories. Poem 85 by the son of Toshiyori, love poem, by the monk Shun-e, 1113 to 1191 approximately. Yomosugara, mono omou koro wa, ake yaranu, neya no hima sae, tsude nakarikedi. On those long nights when I am up lamenting, all seems cruel to me. Even the stubborn darkness seen through the crack in my door. Poem 86 is by the most famous monk of the late Heian period, flourished in the late Heian period, Monk Saigyo. Underline this, put a star next to it. We will do more poems by Saigyo in a later class. This one is as follows. Nageke tote, tsuki yawa mono o omowasuru. Kako chigao naru waga namida kana. As if to tell me, grieve on, the moonlight shines down, but that cannot be. Yet still that is where my tears seem to want to look for blame. Next we have the monk Jakudeng, another famous monk of the late Heian period and early Kamakura period. Lived from 1139 approximately to 1202. This is an autumn poem from a previous 50-poem sequence. Murasame no tsuyu mo mada hinu maki no ha ni kiri tachi noboru aki no yugu de. Needles on the black pines are not yet dry of raindrops from a passing shower when already mist is rising on an evening in autumn. Poem 88 by Koka Mon-in no Betto of the late 12th century. She is a lady-in-waiting to the consort of retired Emperor Sutoka, who is the author of one of the above poems that we just read. For love, this is a love poem written for a poem contest, previous poem contest, with the topic Lovers Meeting at a Traveler's Inn. And the poem is as follows. I will start with the English translation here. Because of one night, brief as the space between joints on Naniwa's reeds, I am to be a buoy, tossed by waves of love. So again, this image of the buoy, I forgot how to pronounce words sometimes, buoy. This image of the buoy appears here. I think it's appeared several times in this collection. It's a common motif in classical Japanese waka, and the English translation is Naniwa e no, so the e of Naniwa around the Osaka area. Naniwa e no, ashi no karine no hito yo yue, mi o tsukushite ya koi wataru beki. Okay, the mi tsukushi is the buoy, but it's a kake kotoba here. It can mean mi o tsukusu as well, right? And both of those meanings are conveyed in the English translation. Princess Shikishi, who died in 1201, is the author of the next poem, a love poem with the headnote on secret love, written for a 100-poem sequence, a previous sequence. Tama no oyo, tae naba tae ne, nagaraeba, shinobu koto no yowari mozo suru. Translation, like a string of jewels, tama no o. Okay, the string of jewels is a common motif or image that is used often in classical Japanese waka. We have a chapter about this phrase in my Nakanishi book. Tama no oyo, tae naba tae ne, nagaraeba, 忍ぶことの弱りもぞする In the English translation, like a string of jewels, break now, shatter my life. For if I live on, I must surely lose the strength to conceal my secret love. Okay, actually this poem is cited in our Nakanishi book, and Nakanishi offers his comments about this and about this poem and about the phrase that the poem begins with, Tama no o. Next poem, poem number 90, a love poem with the head note, a love poem written for a poem contest, an elusive variation or honkadori on a previous anthology by a poem by Minamoto no Shigeyuki of the late 10th century, and the poem is by Imbu Mon-in no Taiyu of the mid 12th century. And the poem is as follows: Mise bayana Ojima no ama no sodeda ni mo nure ni zo nureshi iro wa kawarazu. Look here, look at these. Would even a fisher's sleeve at Ojima Isle, drenched over and again, change so in color as mine? Okay, so we'll have to check the foundational poem on which this one is based. We'll check that later and see how it employs this technique of honkadori, which is becoming more and more frequent as we move through the 11th century and into the 12th, through the 11th century and into the 12th, through the 12th, in the 12th century into the 13th century. All right, brain is starting to freeze. Next, poem 91, Autumn, written for a 100-poem sequence. The Kyogoku regent and former chancellor Fujiwara no Yoshitsune, 1169 to 1206, one of the major poets of the late Heian, early Kamakura period, Fujiwara no Yoshitsune, and the poem, a very famous poem that begins with Kirigirisa. Okay, the poem is Kirigirisa, Naku yashimoyo no samushiro ni koromo katashiki hitori kamo nen. A cricket cries out near my straw mattress in the cold of a frosty night as I spread my single robe to spend the night alone. Okay, so kirigirisu is a cricket, and kirigirisu, as you'll remember from our video on the 500 major kigo or seasonal words, kirigirisu is an autumn word. So immediately from the word kirigirisu, the reader will know that this is a poem set in autumn. Poem number 92 by Nijoin no Sanuki, a lady in waiting to Gotoba's consort Ninshi, lived approximately or possibly 1141 to 1217. This is a love poem with the head note on love/rock. Waga sode wa shio hi ni mienu oki no ishi no hito koso shirane kawaku ma mo nashi. My sleeves are like rocks hidden in the offing even at ebb tide. For no one knows they are here and never are they dry. A little rhyme going on in Carter's English translation there. Poem 93, the Kamakura minister of the right, Minamoto no Sanetomo. Okay, so Minamoto is slowly rising to power. I think they are about to take over at this point, and we get this poem from Minamoto, who is based in Kamakura, which will be the seat of the new shogunate, starting with the next, at the end of the Heian period, in the beginning of the Kamakura period. A son of Minamoto no Yoritomo, and a third of the Kamakura shoguns. Okay, so he will eventually become shogun himself, Sanetomo. This is, he lived 1192 to 1219. So he did not live a very long life. His poem is the following, very famous poem, Yono naka wa tsune ni mo ga mo na nagisa kogu ama no ubune no tsunade kanashi mo. Ah, this world of ours, always it should be like this. A fishing skiff offshore pulled along by men with ropes. A sight that pierces the heart. Poem 94, Autumn, by consultant Asukai Masatsune, 1170 to 1221, with the head note on fulling block, an elusive variation on poem 1245, which we read above at the beginning of this collection, the first half of this collection, by Sakanoe no Korenori. And the poem is as follows. Miyoshino no Yama no akikaze sayo fukete furusato samuku kodomo utsunari. In fair Yoshino, autumn winds blow from the mountains late into the night, and cold in the old capital, the sound of mallet on block. Poem 95 by Archbishop Jieng, so another monk, Buddhist monk here, lived 1155 to 1225, with the headnote topic unknown. Carter notes that in ink black sleeves, the phrase here that appears in the poem refers to the robes of a cleric. At the time, Jien was Tendai abbot, one of the highest of all the ecclesiastic callings. Okay, Tendai, of course, was the first wave of Buddhism that came into Japan before the Nara period, but Tendai became the main sect of Buddhism during the Nara period, and it was the Buddhism of the aristocracy, and eventually that gives way to newer phases of Buddhism in subsequent periods. The poem is as follows. O ke naku ukiyo no tami ni o kanna waga tatsu soma ni sumizome no sode. Although unworthy, I now must guide the people of the vexing world, living in the high timbers, wearing my new ink black sleeves. Okay, so note again how Carter translates the ukiyo as vexing world here. And this ukiyo will eventually come to be the floating world, as I mentioned earlier, with a different kanji used. The floating world of the demimonde and the license quarters, the pleasure quarters, prostitution, and so forth. Poem 96, Miscellaneous, Zo poem with the headnote, written when he saw blossoms falling. Headnote was added by the editors of the collection. And the poet is the lay monk and former chancellor Fujiwara no Kintsuné, 1171 to 1244, and his poem is as follows. Hana sasou arashi no niwa no yuki nara de furi yuku mono wa waga minari keji. My courtyard is strewn with storm-beckoned blossoms and not with snow. The only thing descending here is my body as it grows old. Poem 97, Love, Koi, written for a poem contest. An elusive variation is taking place here, Honkadori, on a famous poem from the Manyoshu, namely Manyoshu poem number 935 by Kasano Kanamura. Seaweed was burnt to extract its salt, is the note that Carter gives there. And the poem is as follows. Poem, yes, the most important one. This poem is by Fujiwara no Teika, who is the main compiler, editor of this collection. So he throws his own poem in here toward the end of the collection. Provisional Middle Counselor Fujiwara no Teika, who lived 1162 to 1241. Kono hito o Matsuo no ura no yu nagi ni yakuyamoshi no mimoko ga retsu. On Matsuo Beach, I wait in the pines at dusk for one who won't come. And like the blazing salt mounds, I too am consumed by fire. That's the consumed by fire, mimoko ga retsu. And poem 98 is a summer poem by Fujiwara no Ietaka of junior second rank. 1158 to 1237 are his dates. This was written for a screen painting. An elusive variation, or honkadori, is taking place here on a previous poem from a previous imperial collection by Minamoto no Yoritsuna. And the anonymous poem from the Shinko Kinshu is also being alluded here, variated, used as a foundational poem here as well. So this is a honkadori on two previous famous canonical poems. Ritual washings, or misogi, this is a Shinto term of course, misogi, ritual purifications or ablutions or ritual washings, were undertaken on the last day of the 6th month, symbolizing purification from sins. I guess at the end of summer, you do a purification of your sins. 風そよぐ奈良の小川の遊具ではみそぎぞ夏の印なりける As day nears its end with a breeze rustling in the oaks along Nara stream, the people doing ablutions, misogi, are the sole signs of summer. Poem 99 by the retired Emperor Go-Toba, who reigned 1184 to 1198 and then lived another 40 years after that. And we've already seen how the Minase Renga sequence that we read, written much later in the medieval period, is dedicated to this emperor. So we're already familiar with this emperor and the kind of poetry that he represented. And this poem is by him, and it's a miscellaneous, a zo poem with a head note topic unknown. And the poem is as follows: Hito mo oshi, hito mo urameshi, aji kinaku, yo o omou yue ni mono omou miba. Kind of difficult to pronounce this poem, to recite this poem. People can seem kind and people can seem cruel. When quiet, foolishly, I wear myself out, worrying over the world and its ways. When quiet, foolishly. Alright, let me do this whole poem once more, both in the original and the translation. Hito mo oshi, hito mo urameshi, aji kinaku. Yo o omou yue ni mono omou mi wa. Okay, aji kinaku became aji kenaku, of course, in later centuries. And the English translation: people can seem kind and people can seem cruel. When quite foolishly I wear myself out worrying over the world and its ways. And finally, poem 100, the final poem of this collection, is by retired Emperor Juntoku, who reigned 1210 to 1221 and then went on and lived another 20 years after his retirement. And he is Go-Toba's son. This is a miscellaneous or zo poem with the head note topic unknown. Shinobu Gusa is a fern, right? We've already talked about that above, whose name is a partial homophone with the verb shinobu, to think fondly of the past. Okay, shinobu is one of those crazy words in classical Japanese that can mean many, many things, but we won't go over all those here. Here it means either, or both rather, a fern, and to think fondly of the past, to recollect on the past nostalgically. And the poem is Momoshiki ya furuki no kiba no shinobu ni mo nao amari yaru mukashi narikeri, sorry. There's no kakari musubi there, so it has to end on the shushike rather than rentaike. That's the rule I wanted to mention above. When you see a kakari musubi used in a poem, the final verb has to take the form of a rentaike, whereas usually it would take the form of a shushike, as it does here, because there is no kakari musubi such as zo or so forth. Alright, and the English translation for this is: in the stone-built palace, the old eaves are overgrown with memory fern. But ah, what a past is here still left to be remembered. Alright, that's the end of this. We'll make another video later that explains the study guide and background information, the key literary terms, some information about the more prominent poets in this collection and so forth. That is all for now. Goodbye. Mail me with your questions.